Emma Parker, are you aware that your college fund was closed 4 years ago? Those were the words that changed everything. Even now, I can still hear them as clearly as if they were spoken yesterday. At the time, I was standing in the lobby of First Community Bank on a bright August morning, holding a folder filled with enrollment papers from the University of Michigan. I had spent years dreaming about that moment, years studying late into the night, working hard in school, and believing every promise my family had made to me. My parents had always said the same thing whenever I worried about tuition. Focus on your grades, Emma. We'll take care of the rest. I trusted them. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. As I stepped up to the customer service desk, I felt excited, nervous, and hopeful all at once. Classes would begin in less than 3 weeks. I was finally ready to access the college fund that had supposedly been growing since I was a child. The account had been mentioned throughout my life, almost like a family tradition. Every birthday, every graduation, every major milestone came with the same reassurance. Your future is secure. I believed it completely. The bank manager, Mr. Collins, greeted me politely and led me into a small office with a glass window overlooking the parking lot. He appeared to be in his 50s, with silver hair and a calm expression. I handed him my documents and explained that I needed information about my education account. He typed for a few moments. Then he stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at the screen. At first, I thought it was just a technical issue. Maybe the system was slow. Maybe he had entered the wrong account number. But the silence stretched longer than it should have. I watched his expression change from routine professionalism to something closer to concern. Finally, he looked up. Emma, he said carefully, are you aware that this account was closed several years ago? I laughed nervously. That can't be right. He turned the monitor slightly toward me. There it was. My name. The account number. The balance. $0. Closed. For years earlier. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at him. Then back at the screen again. The numbers didn't change. They didn't magically correct themselves. My stomach tightened. There has to be a mistake, I said quietly. My parents have been contributing to that account since I was little. Mr. Collins remained silent for a moment. The records show that a withdrawal was authorized before the account was closed. My hands felt cold. Outside, I could see people walking through the parking lot carrying coffee cups and shopping bags, completely unaware that my entire future seemed to be unraveling inside that office. I tried to think logically. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the money had been transferred somewhere else. Maybe my parents had opened a different account. Maybe there was information missing from the records. But deep down, a strange feeling had already begun to grow. A feeling I couldn't explain. Because suddenly, memories started surfacing. Small things I had ignored over the years. Conversations that ended abruptly whenever I asked about college expenses. Nervous looks exchanged across the dinner table. My father changing the subject whenever finances came up. And then there was my sister Olivia's wedding. The extravagant venue. The designer dress. The luxury reception everyone talked about for months afterward. Back then, I had simply been happy for her. Now, sitting across from Mr. Collins, those memories felt different somehow. He clicked through several files before stopping again. His expression became even more serious. Then he looked directly at me and said, Emma, there's something else in these records that I think you need to see. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the air conditioner seemed unusually loud inside the office. Mr. Collins turned the monitor back toward himself and adjusted his glasses before opening another file. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Every answer I thought I had about my future suddenly felt uncertain. Before I show you this, he said carefully, I want to make sure you understand that I can only discuss information connected to your account. I nodded. My voice did not seem to work anymore. He clicked once more and rotated the screen. A scanned document appeared. It was old, dated 4 years earlier. My eyes moved across the page until they landed on a signature. My father's signature. I recognized it instantly. I had seen it on birthday cards, permission slips, and family paperwork my entire life. There was no mistaking it. The withdrawal authorization was signed by Robert Parker, Mr. Collins said gently. According to these records, the funds were released after verification procedures were completed. I stared at the screen. My father. Not a stranger. Not a scammer. Not a bank error. My father. The room felt smaller. I folded my hands together beneath the desk because I did not want him to see them shaking. How much was in the account? I finally asked. Mr. Collins looked down at the file. Including accumulated contributions and investment growth, the balance was approximately $87,000 at the time of closure. $87,000. The number echoed in my head. That was not just money. That was years of promises, years of reassurance, years of believing I was prepared for college. I thanked Mr. Collins and left the office carrying the same folder I had brought in, but somehow it felt heavier. Outside, the August sun was bright and warm. Cars moved through the streets. People walked by with shopping bags and iced coffees. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. Instead, I found myself drifting back through old memories. Growing up, I had always been the practical one. I worked hard in school. I rarely asked for expensive things. Whenever friends talked about student loans, I quietly reminded myself that my parents had planned ahead. My future was supposed to be different. Then I thought about Olivia. My older sister had always been the center of attention. She was outgoing, confident, and impossible to ignore. People naturally gravitated toward her. When she announced her engagement 4 years earlier, the entire family had celebrated for months. I remembered touring wedding venues with her. I remembered the enormous ballroom she eventually chose. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The reception hall overlooked a lake. The place looked like something from a magazine. At the time, I never questioned how expensive it all seemed. My parents constantly insisted everything was under control. Looking back, I remembered smaller details too. The tense conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. My father studying bills late at night. My mother becoming strangely emotional whenever college came up. Once, during my senior year of high school, I asked how much was in the account. My father smiled and changed the subject. Another time, my mother told me not to worry about finances and quickly walked away. Back then, I interpreted those moments as parental concern. Now they felt different. By the time I drove home, the questions were multiplying faster than the answers. But one thing had become painfully clear. Somebody in my family knew exactly what had happened to that money. And for 4 years, nobody had told me the truth. That evening, our family gathered for what was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. My mother had texted earlier in the day, reminding everyone to arrive by 6. Normally, I would have looked forward to it. Family dinners had always been a constant in our lives. No matter how busy things became, we usually found our way back to the same dining room table. This time felt different. I parked in the driveway and sat in my car for a moment before going inside. The questions from the bank had followed me all day. Every answer seemed to lead to another mystery. When I stepped through the front door, the familiar smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread greeted me. My mother smiled from the kitchen. My father was setting plates on the table. Olivia and her husband, Jason, were already there. To anyone looking from the outside, we probably seemed like a perfectly normal family. Yet something felt off almost immediately. My father barely looked at me when I walked in. Olivia was unusually cheerful, talking nonstop about a vacation she and Jason were planning. My mother kept wiping down an already clean countertop. Little things. Small details. The kind most people would never notice. But after everything I had learned, I noticed all of them. We sat down to eat. The conversation drifted from work to travel plans to neighborhood gossip. I listened more than I spoke. Several times I caught my father glancing toward Olivia. Each time, she quickly changed the subject. The pattern repeated itself enough that I could not ignore it. Finally, I decided to test something. I met with someone from the bank today, I said casually. The reaction was immediate. My mother froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My father stopped chewing. Olivia reached for her water glass so quickly that she nearly knocked it over. The silence lasted only a second, but it felt much longer. The bank? Olivia asked. What for? I kept my voice calm. Just getting things ready for college. My father looked down at his plate. My mother suddenly became interested in refilling everyone's drinks. Olivia forced a smile. That sounds exciting. Nobody asked another question. Nobody seemed curious about my enrollment plans. Nobody mentioned the college fund that had supposedly existed my entire life. The silence around the topic felt louder than any argument could have been. As dinner continued, I found myself studying them. For years, I had accepted every explanation they gave me. Now I was seeing things differently. Every nervous glance, every awkward pause, every attempt to steer the conversation somewhere safer. After dessert, I helped my mother clear the table. We stood alone in the kitchen for a few minutes while the others moved into the living room. She looked tired, older than I remembered. I almost told her everything right then. I almost asked the question that had been sitting in my chest all day. But before I could speak, she quietly said something that stopped me. "College is expensive these days," she said while staring into the sink. "Sometimes families have to make difficult decisions." Then she walked away before I could respond. I stood there holding a plate, trying to understand what she meant. Difficult decisions. Not unexpected circumstances. Not mistakes. Decisions. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment replaying every moment from dinner. Around 10 o'clock, my phone vibrated. The message was from Mr. Collins. Attached was a scanned document he had located after our meeting. I opened the file and stared at the screen. Near the bottom was my father's signature. But that was not what made my heart sink. The withdrawal form listed a destination account, and the account holder's name was Olivia Parker. I did not sleep much that night. The document remained open on my laptop long after midnight, its glow filling the dark apartment. I must have read the account information 20 times. Each time, I hoped I had misunderstood something. Each time, the same name stared back at me. Olivia Parker. My sister. By morning, exhaustion had settled into something colder. Determination. I needed to understand what had happened before I confronted anyone. Over the next few days, memories I had ignored for years began resurfacing one after another. It felt like finding pieces of a puzzle hidden in different corners of my life. The first memory was Olivia's engagement party. I remembered my father standing near the kitchen window, speaking quietly with my mother. At the time, I had been too excited for Olivia to pay attention. Looking back, I remembered the tension in their faces. My father looked worried. My mother kept glancing toward the guests and forcing a smile. Then there was the wedding itself. It had been beautiful. Nobody could deny that. The ceremony took place at an upscale lakeside venue nearly 90 miles from our hometown. Fresh flowers lined every aisle. A live band played during the reception. Guests talked about the event for months afterward. I remembered asking Olivia once whether she was nervous about the cost. She laughed and told me not to worry. "Everything is handled," she said. At the time, that answer seemed normal. Now it felt very different. As the days passed, other details emerged. During my senior year of high school, my father unexpectedly sold his fishing boat. He had loved that boat for as long as I could remember. When I asked why he was selling it, he claimed he no longer had time to use it. A few months later, my mother quietly stopped taking weekend trips with her friends. She said she wanted to save money. Back then, I assumed they were simply becoming more careful with finances. Looking back, I wondered whether they were trying to recover from something much larger. One afternoon, I pulled out an old photo album from my closet. The pictures showed birthdays, vacations, graduations, and holidays. For years I had looked at those photos and seen a happy family. Now I found myself studying the expressions more carefully. My mother often looked tired. My father frequently seemed distracted. Olivia always looked radiant and carefree. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was seeing patterns because I wanted answers. But the feeling would not go away. The deeper I looked, the more questions appeared. 3 days after receiving the document, I called Mr. Collins again. He agreed to meet me after work. This time, I arrived with a notebook filled with dates and questions. He listened carefully as I explained what I had discovered. When I finished, he folded his hands on the desk. "Emma," he said, "there is something important you should know." My stomach tightened. He opened another file and slid a printed document across the desk. "The withdrawal did go to an account associated with Olivia," he said. "However, the transfer request included additional authorization documents." I looked down at the paperwork. There were several signatures. One belonged to my father. Another belonged to a witness. Then I saw a third signature. My breath caught. It belonged to my mother. Both of my parents had approved the transfer. Neither of them had been misled. Neither of them had been left out. Whatever decision had been made, they had made it together. I stared at the page for several seconds before looking up. Mr. Collins remained silent. He did not need to explain what the document meant. For years, I had assumed at least one parent would eventually tell me the truth. But sitting there in that office, holding the evidence in my hands, I realized something far more painful. This had never been one person's secret. It had been a family secret. For the next week, I carried the truth with me everywhere. At work, during lunch, while standing in line at the grocery store, even when I was trying to fall asleep. The documents from the bank sat inside a folder on my kitchen table. I did not open them often anymore because I already knew what they said. What haunted me was not the paperwork itself. It was the realization that the people I trusted most had looked me in the eye for years while hiding something that would change my life. I considered confronting them immediately. More than once, I picked up my phone and nearly called my father. But every time I stopped, something told me there was still a piece of the story missing. People do not usually make decisions like that without a reason. I wanted to understand the reason before I demanded answers. A few days later, my mother called and invited me to dinner again. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. I almost declined. Instead, I accepted. When I arrived, everything appeared normal. My father was grilling burgers in the backyard. Olivia and Jason showed up shortly afterward carrying a dessert from a local bakery. They laughed. They chatted. They acted like any ordinary family gathering. Watching them felt surreal. I kept wondering whether any of them realized that I knew. If they did, they hid it well. During dinner, Olivia spent nearly 20 minutes talking about renovations she wanted to make to her house. New kitchen cabinets, updated flooring, a larger patio. I listened quietly. At one point, my father offered to help cover some of the costs. The comment landed differently now. For years ago, I would have thought nothing of it. Now, every financial conversation sounded suspicious. Later that evening, while helping my mother wash dishes, I decided to ask a simple question. Were things difficult financially when Olivia got married? I tried to sound casual. My mother froze for a fraction of a second. It was almost impossible to notice unless you were looking for it. Then she resumed rinsing a plate. Every wedding is expensive, she said softly. Families do what they can. The same kind of answer. Vague, careful, incomplete. I nodded and said nothing more. But the conversation confirmed something important. She knew exactly what I was asking. 2 days later, another unexpected piece of information arrived. Mr. Collins called me during the afternoon. I found something else in the archived records, he said. His tone immediately caught my attention. We arranged another meeting. When I arrived at the bank, he handed me a thin file. Inside were notes attached to the original transfer request. Most of the information was routine. Dates, account numbers, authorization details. Then I noticed a handwritten memo clipped to the back. It appeared to have been added by a bank employee years earlier. The note referenced an urgent request from the account holders. According to the memo, the transfer had been processed because the family faced a significant financial obligation that required immediate funding. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. A significant financial obligation. Not a wedding payment. Not a celebration. Not a luxury expense. Something else. Something serious enough that bank staff had documented the urgency. I looked up at Mr. Collins. Do you know what obligation they were referring to? He slowly shook his head. No, but whatever it was, it appears there is more to this story than the transfer itself. As I gathered the documents and prepared to leave, my phone vibrated. A new text message had arrived from Jason. My brother-in-law rarely contacted me directly. The message contained only one sentence. Emma, there is something about that year that Olivia never wanted you to find out. The message stayed on my screen for a long time. I read it again and again, trying to understand why Jason would reach out now after years of silence on family matters. He had always been polite, but he rarely involved himself in disagreements. If he was contacting me directly, something had changed. I replied with a simple question. What do you mean? Nearly an hour passed before he answered. Then another message appeared. Not over text. We need to talk in person. The following afternoon, we met at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. Rain tapped softly against the windows while people worked on laptops and chatted quietly around us. Jason looked uncomfortable from the moment he sat down. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and stared at the table before finally speaking. I never knew about your college fund, he said. Not until after Olivia and I got married. I listened without interrupting. The wedding was expensive, he continued. But that is not why the money was transferred. My pulse quickened. Then why was it? Jason let out a long breath. About 6 months before the wedding, Olivia got involved in a business opportunity with a friend. The phrase immediately sounded familiar. I had heard stories like that before. Promises of quick success, easy profits, exciting opportunities. Jason shook his head. It failed. Badly. He explained that Olivia had invested far more money than she could afford to lose. At first, she believed she could recover the losses before anyone noticed. Instead, the situation grew worse. Bills accumulated. Deadlines approached. Legal notices began arriving. According to Jason, Olivia eventually confessed everything to our parents. They were terrified, he said quietly, not just for her finances. They were afraid the situation would damage her future before she even started married life. I stared at him. So they used my fund. He nodded slowly. That is what happened. The answer should have felt satisfying. Instead, it left me with even more questions. Why did nobody tell me? Jason looked genuinely sad. Because they convinced themselves they would replace the money. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, cars moved through the wet streets while people hurried beneath umbrellas. Life continued as normal for everyone else. Did they ever try? I finally asked. At first, yes, Jason said. Your father picked up extra work. Your mother cut expenses wherever she could. Olivia promised she would pay everything back. He paused. But life kept happening. Mortgage payments, medical bills, unexpected expenses. Years passed faster than they expected. I looked down at my untouched coffee. Everything Jason described sounded painfully ordinary. There was no grand conspiracy, no dramatic criminal scheme. Just a series of choices made by people who believed they could fix a problem later. The problem was that later never came. Does Olivia know I found out? I asked. Jason hesitated. Not yet. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. But she might soon. He slid it across the table. My name was written on the front in my mother's handwriting. What is this? I asked. Jason's expression grew serious. Your mother gave me that 3 years ago. She said if the truth ever came out, I was supposed to make sure you received it. I stared at the envelope. Whatever answers I had been searching for, it seemed my mother had known this day would eventually arrive. And judging by the weight of the envelope in my hands, she had been carrying those answers for a very long time. I did not open the envelope immediately. Instead, I carried it home and placed it on my kitchen table beside the folder from the bank. For nearly an hour, I simply stared at it. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. Seeing my name written in those familiar letters made something tighten in my chest. Whatever was inside had been waiting for me for 3 years. Eventually, I sat down, took a deep breath, and carefully opened it. Inside was a letter and a smaller sealed document. I unfolded the letter first. The date at the top confirmed what Jason had said. My mother had written it 3 years earlier. The first line alone made my eyes sting. Emma, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally found its way to you. I continued reading slowly. My mother admitted that what happened to the fund was wrong. She did not make excuses. She did not blame anyone else. She simply described the months leading up to Olivia's wedding. According to the letter, when Olivia revealed the financial trouble she had created, the entire family panicked. My father wanted to find another solution. My mother wanted to postpone the wedding. Olivia insisted she would fix everything herself. None of those plans worked. As deadlines approached, fear took over. My parents convinced themselves they were protecting the family. They believed they could borrow from my future temporarily and restore everything before I ever needed the money. Then came the sentence that stopped me. We never chose Olivia over you. We chose the problem in front of us because we were too afraid to face the consequences. I read that line several times. It did not erase what happened. It did not make the betrayal disappear, but it revealed something important. For years, I had imagined secret conversations where everyone decided I mattered less. The reality seemed more complicated and far more human. My mother continued by describing the guilt that followed. She wrote about sleepless nights, arguments behind closed doors, and constant promises that next year would be different. Every year they planned to rebuild the account. Every year some new expense appeared. Time passed. The debt remained. At the end of the letter, she apologized. Not with dramatic words. Not with emotional speeches. Just a simple apology written in her own handwriting. Then I opened the second document. Unlike the letter, it was not personal. It was legal. I immediately recognized the name printed at the top. It belonged to my grandfather, my mother's father. The document appeared to be an amendment to his estate plan. I read the first page quickly, then returned to the beginning and read it again more carefully. My grandfather had established a contingency provision years earlier. If funds designated for educational purposes were ever redirected, the beneficiary retained specific rights to compensation from a separate trust account. My heart began to race. I checked the date. The amendment had been created long before the transfer ever happened. Somehow, My grandfather had anticipated the possibility that family circumstances might interfere with the original fund. Attached to the document was information for an attorney who managed the trust. At the bottom of the page, my mother had written one final note in blue ink. If this day ever comes, call him before you confront anyone. Trust me. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the papers spread across the table. For weeks, I had been searching for answers about the past. Now it seemed my grandfather had left behind something that could change the future. The next morning, before I spoke to a single member of my family, I picked up my phone and dialed the attorney's number. The attorney answered on the third ring. His name was Michael Reynolds, and even over the phone, he sounded calm and professional. After I explained who I was, there was a brief silence. Then he said something unexpected. "Emma, I have been wondering if I would ever receive this call." My grip tightened around the phone. He asked me to come to his office that afternoon. The building was located downtown in a quiet brick office complex overlooking the river. When I arrived, he greeted me warmly and led me into a conference room. A thick folder already sat on the table waiting for us. For the next hour, he walked me through documents I had never seen before. My grandfather had established the trust nearly 15 years earlier. At the time, he wanted to ensure that educational opportunities remained protected for future generations of the family. The trust contained provisions designed specifically for situations where funds intended for education were diverted because of family emergencies or financial pressures. Your grandfather was a practical man, Mr. Reynolds explained. He understood that good people sometimes make poor decisions when they are afraid. I listened carefully as he opened another file. According to the records, because the original college fund had been depleted, I remained eligible to receive compensation through the trust. The amount was not identical to the money that had been removed, but it was substantial enough to cover tuition, housing, books, and other educational expenses. For a moment, I simply stared at him. Weeks earlier, I had believed my future was collapsing. Now I was being told that my grandfather had quietly built a safety net years before anyone knew it would be needed. "Does my family know about this?" I asked. Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Your mother knew." Somehow that answer did not surprise me. Suddenly, her letter made much more sense. She had not only left me an explanation, she had left me a path forward. As the meeting continued, Mr. Reynolds explained another important detail. Activating the trust did not require legal action against my parents or Olivia. No lawsuits, no public disputes, no courtroom battles. The process could be completed privately. I felt a wave of relief. For days, I had imagined painful confrontations and permanent damage to our family. Now another option existed. When I finally left the office, the city looked different. Not because anything around me had changed, but because I had changed. The anger that had fueled me for weeks was beginning to fade. The hurt remained. The disappointment remained. But the overwhelming sense of panic was gone. That evening, my phone rang. Olivia's name appeared on the screen. For several seconds, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Her voice sounded shaky. "Emma, Jason told me you know." There was no point pretending otherwise. "Yes," I said quietly. Silence followed. Then I heard her take a deep breath. I never wanted this to happen. Months earlier, those words might have satisfied me. Now they felt inadequate. Not because they were false, but because they arrived years too late. "I know," I replied. Another silence stretched between us. Finally, Olivia asked the question I had been expecting. "What are you going to do?" I looked out the window toward the evening sky. The answer came easier than I expected. "I am going to college." Olivia began to cry softly. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel triumphant. Mostly, I felt tired. Before ending the call, I told her there would be a family meeting soon. There were still truths that needed to be spoken aloud. There were still consequences that needed to be faced. But for the first time since walking into the bank, I was no longer afraid of what came next. And neither, I suspected, was Olivia. The family meeting took place the following Saturday afternoon. We gathered in my parents' living room, the same room where birthdays had been celebrated, holidays had been shared, and countless family photographs had been taken over the years. Nothing about the room had changed. The furniture was the same. The framed pictures were the same. Yet everything felt different. My father sat quietly in his recliner. My mother held a cup of tea with both hands. Olivia and Jason sat together on the couch. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Then my father finally broke the silence. "I am sorry, Emma. The words were simple, honest, long overdue. He did not try to defend himself. He did not explain away the choices that had been made. He simply apologized. My mother began to cry softly. Olivia looked down at the floor. I listened without interrupting as each of them shared their side of the story. The details were painful, but no longer surprising. Fear had led to one bad decision. That decision had created another, then another. Eventually, the truth became so difficult to face that everyone convinced themselves they would deal with it tomorrow. The problem was that tomorrow kept becoming next month, then next year, then 4 years. When they finished speaking, the room became quiet again. I reached into my bag and removed the documents from the trust attorney. My parents immediately recognized them. My mother's eyes filled with tears when she saw the familiar paperwork. "You found it," she whispered. I nodded. Grandpa made sure my education would still be protected. Relief spread across my father's face. For the first time all afternoon, some of the tension seemed to leave the room. I explained that the trust would cover my college expenses. There would be no legal battle, no public accusations, no attempt to punish anyone. Olivia covered her face with her hands and cried openly. "I do not deserve your forgiveness," she said. I thought carefully before answering. "Maybe not today," I said quietly. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Nobody argued with that. Over the next several weeks, changes began happening throughout the family. My parents started working with a financial advisor to organize their finances honestly. Olivia and Jason sold several luxury items they no longer needed and began repaying part of the money they had originally promised to replace. Nobody forced them to do it. They chose to. For me, the most important change was simpler. The secrets were gone. A month later, I moved into my dormitory at the University of Michigan. My room was small, with a narrow bed, a desk beside the window, and just enough space for the boxes I had brought with me. As I unpacked my books and clothes, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened. Just weeks earlier, I believed my future had been stolen. Instead, I had gained something unexpected. Clarity. I finally understood that people are not divided neatly into heroes and villains. Sometimes good people make choices they regret. Sometimes fear causes damage that lasts for years. Sometimes the people who love us disappoint us most. On my first evening on campus, I walked across the quad as the sun began setting behind the academic buildings. Students laughed nearby. Families said their goodbyes. A cool breeze moved through the trees. My phone vibrated with a new message from my mother. It contained only a single sentence. "Grandpa would be proud of you today." I stood there for a moment looking at the words. Then I smiled and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The money had mattered. The betrayal had mattered.